Hello there, everyone, and welcome to the wild, weird, and wacky world of the Word. Today we're going to look at something that pops up every now and then in conversation, and that is, what about all these letters of Paul? You know, just did he really write all this stuff? Did he write this much? Well, let me tell you, it's yes and no and maybe, and we just don't know. We just don't know. It was a habit of many who were writing letters back in Paul's day to attach the name of someone important to their letter so that it would get read by whatever audience it was being written to. And so it got a little out of hand, so to speak, so that there are many things that are written back in those ancient days that weren't written by the person that they said they were written by. Got that? All right. And it was no different with the letters that the apostles wrote. And we have Paul's letters. Now, there's something to keep in mind here. When you're reading one of these letters, you're opening up someone else's mail. You get arrested for doing that in the United States. You're not supposed to do that. So, that's probably under the heading of a misdemeanor, unless there's money involved or something like that. Then it could be a little more serious. But you don't open up someone else's mail. And what we have, when we're reading the letters of Paul, we're reading mail that he wrote to churches or individuals, not to you or me. So keep that in mind too. But how is it that we have them now? Well, other people saw these letters, or people who maybe the church that received that letter said, oh, this is really good stuff. It's blessed us and we're now enriched by it. We're going to share it with the neighboring church over in that other city next door. And so someone copied it and sent it over, and they liked it and they copied it. Maybe two other churches said, hey, give us a copy of those too. So they got copied. Before you know it, it's all over the place. All right. That also presents us with some problems. But before we get to the problems that are inherent in our gospel, or not our gospel lesson, but our second lesson for this coming Sunday, just another word about Paul's letters. There are some of the letters that scholars today say, oh, definitely, the Apostle Paul wrote this. And you're talking about his first letter to the Thessalonians, Galatians, Philippians, Philemon, and Romans. Now, there's some questions about at least parts of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and there's a lot to get into in there, but at the very least, it was written by an apostle that was close to Paul, or one of his own disciples. But there are many who still think, yeah, these are genuine Pauline letters, all right? But when you start getting into Ephesians and Colossians, and then the second letter of Thessalonians, there's a lot more issues involved there that, unless Paul's theology changed radically through the ages, there's some question as to whether he actually wrote them. We're not going to get into that right now. But all in all, before I go any further, I just want to say it doesn't mean we don't read this stuff and use it for our benefit as Christians. There's lots of good stuff in all these letters. And it doesn't matter who wrote them. They were sincere, honest, and all from the heart. So keep that in mind. Now, what about specifically when we get to the letters to the Corinthians? Well, let me just give you an example. We've been reading from 1st and 2nd Corinthians all during this Lenten season, and maybe you said, you know what, I should go back and read the whole thing and not just those little snippets that we have in church. Good deal. Good. That's good for you. So you went back, you started reading 1 Corinthians, and you get to chapter 5, verse 9, and he goes, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral persons. Well, okay, the issue is not that we're looking at the sexually immoral persons. That's what Paul wanted them to talk about. But the fact that I wrote to you in my letter. What? Wait a minute. This is 1 Corinthians. This is his letter to the Corinthians. Uh-oh. You mean he wrote to them before this? Why not? He didn't title this letter 1 Corinthians. We did that when we were putting the canon of scriptures together. No. So already there's evidence right within the letter that he had written a previous letter. which we unfortunately don't have. Well, it just didn't get shared, or maybe it got burned. Maybe it was a really letter that he was really getting at them, and they said, oh, and they ripped it up and threw it in the fire. Who knows? Who knows? Okay, so now this week our second lesson comes from the second letter to the Corinthians, and you get to chapter 2, and he says this: so I made up my mind not to make you another painful visit, for if I caused you pain, who is there to make me glad but the one whom I have pained? And I wrote as I did, so that, and he goes on and on. Well, what? Wait a minute. He wrote again? Wait, this is 2 Corinthians, but there's none of that stuff mentioned in 1 Corinthians. It's not the same. And what? So now you're sitting there. Did he write 4 letters? Did he write 8 letters? Did he write 12 letters to the Corinthians? We don't know. He probably wrote a lot because he loved the Corinthian church and he knew that they were in trouble. So that's part of the what's behind the intense Bible study and pulling apart all these letters of Paul, is to find out, okay, in what order did he write them? Where did he write them? We know who they're going to because it's mentioned in the letter. And all of that helps us understand the context of those letters and why he wrote them the way he did and why he said what he did in order to strengthen the body of Christ. And we do that, and we really dive into it headlong so that we can be strengthened and we don't go astray and assume this is what he's talking about. Sometimes you have to make some assumptions because you just don't know. But it's better to be well equipped, meaning us, as to knowing what's going on and saying, okay, that's almost 2,000 years ago. What does it mean for us today? Just to simply pick it up and start reading it and saying, okay, this is what we're supposed to be doing now. Hey, there's a lot of things we don't do now that people did 2,000 years ago that don't make a lot of sense. So think about all that too. How does this fit into our way of living together as the body of Christ, as the church? And how do we relate to the world around us? A world that's constantly changing, but one that's still under the lordship of Jesus Christ. But how do we make sense of all that? How do we put it together? Okay, let's look to what we have, which are these letters of Paul, which are older than the Gospels that were written. We have a better look at the early church and also the outlook of the early Jesus followers, because for the most part, they weren't called Christians till much later. They're simply Jesus followers, Jews who believed that Jesus was Messiah, and those who on the outside came in to believe that this Jesus, not only is he a cool dude, but he's really got something to say to us, and I believe him. So it's important. It's important that we study these letters and really pick them apart. Some people say, oh, you're getting too crazy. No, you're never getting too crazy. Not when it's something this serious. And Paul gets into some really deep, heavy subjects. And sometimes it's hard to understand why he's saying what he's saying. And that's why it's even better to dig even deeper into these works. Oh, man. It's enough to almost give you a headache sometimes, because this is a wild, weird, and wacky world of the Word. But it's a wonderful world. Just remember that. God's blessings be with you.